show. I have some stuff I have to do today that's going to have me on the road, so it's either do it at the crack of dawn or don't do it at all. So I decided to go ahead and make a virtue of the fact that I'm up early. I'm even up before I've cleaned out the chicken coop. Shows you how early it is. It's about 5:15 in the morning here, U.S. East Coast, and welcome to the show. Just a reminder, those of you who want to support the broadcast, the Venmo's at CBCPRV. Your contributions are very helpful. It lets me do my research and learn things. And you might want me doing research now, because the truth is money isn't going to be worth as much to you as being able to keep alive and be prepared for what's coming. If I can keep in front of it, so can you. And maybe we all make it together, which is one of the points of today's show. If you want to send any comments, my email is newalbion@protonmail.com, but you can get me faster if you join our Telegram group, t.me/@AtlanticHomeland. You can find me over there. And if you want to do things by snail mail, which probably don't recommend at this point because it doesn't move very fast, P.O. Box 35, Greenville Junction, Maine 04442. Okay, so that's the precursor to it. So like I was saying, today is a show about survival, and it's about what's coming, and it's about what we need to do. And it's a little different from other shows. I've been listening as precursor to today's show, which is going to be all about us versus them. I've been listening to a lot of broadcasts about the impending supply chain disaster. And I will tell you now, I'll put out a bulletin basically because what I'm hearing justifies this. Food scarcity is going to become a big problem in probably within the next month or two, if not faster, and fuel shortages are going to be rampant. I've been reading about a propane apocalypse where, as of maybe, let's say, January, based on the futures markets, people aren't going to be able to access propane. If that happens at the same time that we're having the projected oil shortages and natural gas, gasoline, there's a refinery problem. What's going to happen is right when we hit midwinter into January, I'd say, but maybe even hints before then, you're going to have the inability to get liquid fuels at retail outlets to power your house or warm your house this winter. So if you live in a northern climate like I do, state of Maine, that means you need to be doing two things like your life depends on it, because it very well may. If your survival is dependent upon having access to plentiful supplies of this, you need to make sure you have sufficient supply on hand. And let me be very clear. A lot of people who live in a place like Maine will buy a contract where, let's say, you use an average heating oil, which is what they have up here. In the mid-Atlantic, they have natural gas where the pipeline tends to come direct to your house. Danger there is if the whole system runs out. In New England, because of the fact the ground is rocky and they don't have the infrastructure for pipelines, people tend to have huge oil tanks, which usually run about 250 gallons, sometimes smaller, occasionally bigger. People will fill those up with number 2 heating oil. I think it's called number 2. Maybe it's number 1, whatever it is. They fill it up with heating oil, and then that will last however long it lasts. And then what people will do is they'll buy a contract agreeing to buy X amount of gallons based on previous year of usage, whether it's filling up twice or 3 times, depending on how cold you think the winter will be. And keep in mind, all these volcanoes going off means the winter might be quite cold. They'll buy the amount, and then they'll lock in a price where theoretically the retailer will have that amount of oil on hand. And it's a good idea to do most years. I would be cautious this year, not because you don't want to be buying the oil, but because if you don't have things in hand, I'm not sure you're going to get them. Because when demand goes crazy, contracts are going to become highly theoretical, call it an act of God or whatever. They have all sorts of built-in ways out of these contracts. So what am I telling you? I'm telling you, make sure you have whatever you plan on heating your house on hand. It's probably not a bad idea to have some extra space heaters, passive heating solutions, that's heavy drapes, ways you can keep heat in. And if you don't have it already, wood is a good way to go. It's basic. Some of you, some of my Facebook friends, you see, I've been restoring an old wood stove just in preparation for that, have another backup. And not even a backup, but a primary, because we are hearing about blackouts happening. There are issues happening in Europe now to go along with the issues we've seen in the Middle East and in Asia. And there is a worldwide shortage of energy that is being produced. And it goes to a lot of different things, right? But the biggest thing it goes to is the supply chain breakdown, the shutdown of the key infrastructure, the ports, the fact that people aren't moving. When goods and services don't move, it doesn't take long before. It's just like, if you think of it this way, all you need is enough blood clots in one body. Don't we know better than anyone? And then it won't be long before the heart stops beating. And an economy is kind of like a heart. It requires a degree of velocity that we are just not meeting anymore. And the reason it's working is because there's little pools of blood, if you want to extend the metaphor, out there that are being used to keep this going. But that is going to begin falling off. Now, When this happens, and I can't tell you precisely how fast, but it could happen as short as a couple weeks, and it could take as long as a few months. But when this happens, not if this happens, because we've been waiting for this since the beginning of COVID. It just turned out there were a lot more supplies there to be grabbed. Those supplies are gone, and you see the proof of this, by the way. You go to the stores, you look at the costs going up quickly, you look at the lack of items, you look at the fact that they've covered the difference by having wider aisles and more of the same item. Okay, all of these little facts out there, you begin to understand that you're going to very quickly be in an us versus them scenario. And that's what this show is all about. Now, when people think of us versus them, they probably think of something rather pleasant, like, oh, I'm a Democrat, they're a Republican, or, I'm a Red Sox fan, you're a Yankees fan, or whatever it is. Although I don't like either. Well, actually, I kind of like the Yankees, but that's a long story. It goes back to my mother. What I want you to understand is that's not the us versus them scenario you're going to be dealing with. The us versus them scenario, the us is going to be the people directly who are caught up in your survival as part and beneficial to their own survival. And the them is going to be the rest of the world who, being ill prepared and following bad propaganda, is going to be your enemy. And I share this with a unique insight, and I have to tell a little story in order to do this right, because I accidentally stumbled down memory lane yesterday. I didn't want to, and it was a miserable experience for me, but I did it. Some of you will remember that a few years back, I used to run a town, and I got in trouble because I said certain things like, I don't think feminism works to the benefit of women. I said that Islam is a third-rate religion. I said that, whites shouldn't have to apologize for being white. All of these things that you guys know, I think, and that honestly have been the target of woke culture, which, if you begin to understand it, it's programming through linguistic engineering to attack people through self-hatred and a lack of logic. Leave that aside, topic for another show. We all understand wokeism is insane. But what I wanted you to understand is that I went back and I happened to go through Facebook, and I was like deleting old comments because I was trying to clear up something. I was trying to find something old I bought. So I stumbled onto a bevy of comments I never saw that came in of the week I got fired. And it gave me a memory, a recollection of how rotten people are. There's about 5% of the people are media who are going out there wanting to ask me questions so they can run hit pieces on me. In other words, use me to their advantage to advance themselves, okay? 5% were people who had genuine questions, who I think wanted to engage and just had a lack of understanding. And 90% were people who were idiots, we'll say that, although the word in my mind is stronger than that, who just wanted to write obscene comments and insults they heard at myself and my wife. Actually, that's not fair. Of the insults. Now, to be fair, there about 40% of the people were quite supportive and said, thank you, please, for speaking up for, sanity. But that's not going to happen in this scenario. So let's just focus on our enemies. So people who are upset and who don't understand what's happening and who are being prodded by the machine are going to be angry, and they're going to be rotten, and they're going to attack. And there's going to be a lot of them, because all these people who think they deserve an attaboy for following the plan, whether that means getting fuel injected, right? Whether that means, going ahead and living in the city and getting the little passport and following that, they are going to be an angry mob that are going to demand, not just permit, but demand, as things get bad, that the government takes it out on whoever blames them, because they don't know. Reason goes out the window in this, and you need to understand the psychology of this, because you're going to be living in this world. Even if it's just your community, it could be you and the 3 neighbors living next to you, whoever it is. The people who do not prepare are not going to blame the system. They're going to blame first who the system tells them to blame, because in times of panic, in times of, deficit, what they're going to do is they're going to follow their patterns. They're going to say, okay, well, we're going to take support from good boys and girls, and they're going to attack people. So if you're someone like us who has been preparing, you're going to be branded as a hoarder. You've already been branded as an extremist and a dissident. The government has painted you as a non-person so they can sick their army of the sick against you. And they're doing this not just in the United States of America, but you see it in Australia, UK, throughout Europe, all these different places. This is deliberate engineering of a social breakdown. And the government is the most responsible entity, because they're the one who have been pushing these mandates that have attacked the infrastructure of the country. Boeing is going to be going on strike soon. There's your airplane resupply. Union Pacific, apparently, if Mike Adams is right, they're going to strike soon. So rails aren't going to save you in this thing. Rubber shortages and tires are starting to become a real issue. As that happens, long-haul trucking is going to become a problem. And we're not even talking about passports between states and the ridiculous mandates. We're not talking about how the owner-operators are being banned from places like Long Beach and those hundreds of ships sitting off our shore, which we don't know what's in them. Cargo in some of them, of course. Other things, who knows? We just had a hypersonic missile flipped around our country, and we are more and more isolated than we've ever been. So here in America, our government is complicit in some sort of global effort, whether through incompetence, ignorance, or just pure straight up evil, to destroy the well-being of the people of this country. And if I can take a step back here, I have to tell you something you're not maybe you guys are ready here, but most people aren't ready here. You need to start telling people this is your gospel. If you are a person who believes in good, especially if you're a Christian, or if you believe in the decence of a common culture, I hate to say it, you can no longer be an American patriot. And this is a hard thing for people to understand, but pride in country is disobedience to God, especially when that country explicitly defends a culture that stands against everything that the book teaches. It's anti-life. It's anti-truth. I mean, multiculturalism, if you want to think of it this way, is the division of truth into so many falsehoods that it cannot be put back together. It is a doctrine of demons, and it's a chaotic way of looking at the world. And if you try to save what you were propagandized from youth, from your parents, from TV, from all these stories, was a good and great place, you're going to lead to your own self-destruction. America's dead. Accept it, and accept that it hasn't been a good place for a very, very long time. Maybe it never was. It doesn't matter today. We don't need to get into the history of it. If you're interested in it, go buy my books on it. Someone has to say it. Will give you a big hint. Or if you want, Come Out of Babylon gives you some more deeper backdrop that's more general. What you need to know is how you reorganize as the us versus them, and that's the point of today's show. And so what is us? If them is multicultural, slavishly obedient to government, dependent at every level, fuel injected, and we have to be the opposite. We have to be independent. We have to be self-sufficient. We have to be obedient to God, and we have to be servants to one another, able to support ourselves in self-sufficiency and defense. And we need to start building these networks right now, because if us versus them is you versus everybody, not only will they win and get to go ahead and build whatever horrible computer future they need, every person who had anything worth defending in humanity is going to be lost as a casualty of that war, including you and your family, no matter how well prepared you are. This is not a battle that can be won off. It just can't be. For reasons that should be really obvious, the weight of numbers. And look, they will have more casualties, but it doesn't matter. The German army had less casualties than the Soviets. The Soviets still won because they could absorb those casualties. And the problem is the propaganda state, especially the globalist effort, can absorb a lot. And the number of people who understand sanity and who are willing to stand up for this are shrinking every day. So how do you define who us is? And I've decided we could go into the theoretical versions of it, but frankly, you probably don't have time to consider all that if you've gone through it. So I'm going to give you a real practical way to do it. I'm going to tell you how I do it. And I suggest strongly you begin applying it to your own life, lest you be in a situation where you're stuck of a war of all against all. Living in Leviathan's future is not very fun. And the Bible even warns us about Leviathan, although it means a different thing, a sea creature, right? So first, number one is, and if you're going to start with a broken culture, which is to say a people who does not know their truth, you have to start by reclaiming the central truth upon which you're going to organize. Historically speaking, in the United States, my experience as a dissident has been that people want that truth to be rooted in some political reality or some ideology, whether it be liberty or, the alt-right. It was sort of like this idea of identity. And they were stumbling towards ideas that had some value. But the truth is, you put the highest truth forward and you defend that. And for us, it should be divinity. And I'm going to say this. You are going to be dealing with a crisis of faith in the near future where the world is going to come against you. And you're going to need something bigger than the world itself to help you endure and sustain beyond that. Take it from someone who's been going now 65, 66, I don't know, Dana knows the number, how many days without electricity, that you're going to need to be ready for these sort of challenges that are coming forward. How do you do that? You put God at the center of your life. And how do you find people you trust? You find people who share your values. If you're a Christian, your set of values is laid out to you. It's laid out in the Ten Commandments. It's laid out in the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's laid out in the promise of the salvation that comes for those who fight through tribulation for the harvest of the people who are together. It's a unifying doctrine that brings people together, and it is what Western civilization's goodness was based upon. I would submit to you most thoughtfully that what you need to do is center your life, not just individually, but collectively around Christ, because you're going to need help to get through this, and being able to pray and ask upon the power of the Most High is going to be very smart for you. But not just from the sense of faith-based, but it's also the idea of how are you going to trust the people who are out there? Because look, I will tell you my personal story once again. I went ahead and I went into a survival community with people who were not equally yoked, let's say, whose spiritual beliefs diverged from our own, and we thought the common interest would be enough to bridge these gaps. But it wasn't, because at the end of the day, they wanted to keep fighting for the world. They wanted to keep fighting for the country. They wanted to keep fighting for a nostalgia for a country that never was and is already gone. And that sort of delusion will get you killed. You need people who stand with you on the same thing. And even if you disagree with what I put as the central truth, understand that your group, whatever it is going to need that central truth to bind you. I would suggest you pick the highest truth, and that would give you the best chances of a happy outcome. But that's where you start. Number two, you need people who you can trust are going to be human. And that's why I submit to you that my own personal requirement, and I know this is more important even than family. And I understand what I'm saying by this to people, but it's that literally I would not allow anyone who has a fuel injection in our midst. And the reason why is they don't know what they are, and they can't know what they are. And it's not that they're bad people, and it's not that I don't pray and hope for a happy outcome for them, but realistically, they are now part of the biggest experiment in history by one of the most malevolent global regimes we have seen throughout all time. Good morning to Dana. Man, you're up early today, but probably because I opened the door low. But it's 5:30 in the morning. We're going to continue. I'm telling the story today, just as a reset, because Dana's here, is that how the us versus them works and what we need to work on to build groups that could actually stand against this. The first step, of course, being that, find that central truth. I suggest Christ. The second thing is you don't want people who are going to be an immediate liability. You don't want people who are going to be connected to the global regime. And I'll just put it to you this way. If they were willing to sell out, whether it be for trusting the regime, whether it be for wanting to keep financial status and comforts, these are people who are going to be wanting at every opportunity to return to the system if they are in fact already inoculated by that. And it may be that if they get sick, there'll be a promised cure, but you have to do this. They are stuck in the ultimate cycle of problem, reaction, solution. And look, if you are in that group and you are there, here's what I suggest. Number one, repent, ask Christ to forgive you, and if you could be saved, to be saved. I'm not sure you can. I'll be really honest with you. I think there's a pretty damn good chance this is the mark. But if you can't, then go ahead and find other people like you, and find people who are going to go ahead and not go any deeper. Apparently, a lot of people got saline, a lot of people got placebo. Perhaps you're lucky. Perhaps the Holy Spirit was looking out for you, and the Father did you a favor. I'm not really sure. And I know people say, oh, how can you be that judgmental? How can I not be? Do you guys ever watch things? You want to have a bad day? Go on Stu Peters, stupeters.tv, and go watch a few videos about what's in this. You'll go ahead and see some interesting things. You'll see Parasite. You'll see Nanotech. You'll see all sorts of little awful buggers that are going around in people now. And let me tell you, this is not going to become less. This is going to become more. You saw, actually, I was posting this in our Telegram group today. There are little human-looking robots that do these little flying, like glide things, almost like a chicken without flapping. They'll glide over stairs and they'll walk towards you like a creepy robot doll. And we see these more and more being implemented. So, and actually, I was reading a really cool study from 2016 about how if you break 3 microwaves a certain way, you can build a taser that wrecks robots. You might want to go ahead and start researching some how to do Mr. Wizard type stuff, because we may need that in the future. But understand that whatever people you want in your group, your us versus them group, you need to have a common vision, and you need to have faith that those people are going to remain themselves. And whatever you require for that, if you don't want people who fit a certain identity, or you don't trust them, or you want people who adhere to a certain identity, I have no problem with any of that. At this point, it's time to cut through all the crap of having people around who you think might be good people. You can't have someone in your group that you don't trust up front. And even because I'll tell you the truth, even if you trust them up front, you very well may be wrong. And if you're wrong, it may be devastating and catastrophic. You don't want anyone who's not bringing at least something to the table in terms of their own weight. It could be assets, could be skills, skills. I mean, I honestly think you do better to have people with modest assets and large skill sets. And I'll tell you why. Because people who come into these networks with a lot of assets and not a lot of skills get in the habit of thinking in the old world way where their value is greater because they're the ones bringing the capital. We are now entering into a labor intensive fight. And what do I mean by that? That your value is in actual hard assets you have on hand. Yes, but more importantly, the skills you bring going forward for survival. Because if all you have is a lot of assets and not a lot of skills, you better hope you have some very good friends. Because right now you're just a net user in the same way. You're the welfare queen of the post financial world. You understand that? Okay, so how do we begin employing this? And I'm giving you the darkest, worst scenario where the food doesn't come, the trucks aren't moving, and that. But before then, what can we do? Because there's a lot of pieces out there. War with China is a distinct possibility. Destruction of the U.S. is that, and we're going to be told at the same time that our government hates us and attacking us. We have let them eat cake, sake in there, and all the we have brain dead Biden, right? Keeping all the shelves bare on purpose, by the way. That we are still saying, well, we're going to fight for this country. We're going to protest. First off, you can't protest and you can't gather. People who are gathering, and I've read a couple stories on this, people who are gathering in certain places are getting sick, but it's only when people who are patriotically minded gather. You know, think of the Iroquois and the dirty blankets, right? That story. I believe it's very possible something like that's happening and opposition's being removed. You know, we know the sad case of Russ Dizdar, a warrior who was out there fighting against satanic ritual abuse and about children who were being stolen. Very sad story, and yet the demons over there in the Twitterverse were going out there and celebrating his loss and this terrible sickness of his wife. And I just asked the Lord to lift up that family. And if Shelley's still around, her health. These are good people who are being attacked by bad people. And bad people don't stop. Evil does not stop attacking you. The only reason why they will stop attacking you is if they don't see you and they're afraid of you. And then they'll attack one another to try to present themselves as over you. They only come after you if you have something they have and they don't think they can defeat you. Then they pretend they're your friends. That's what the government of the United States has done for a very long time. But the government of the United States has not been your friend for a very long time. The media sure the hell hasn't. For 100 years, we've been fighting subjugation by bankers and all their entities, and now we have these transhumanist crazy bastards who want to turn us all into machines, who want to make us into robots and part of their world where they get to live forever. We don't want to be a part of it. We need to begin pulling out. So don't think about saving America. Think about saving yourself, saving the people who you can be close to, which, God willing, I hope includes your family, because I understand it's heartbreaking if you have people in your family you can't save because they think differently. I'm going to tell you, though, use this time now to get them right in the head, and if you can't, you're not going to want to hear this, but you accept the losses. And I say this with people in my own family who I have to consider from that angle, okay? Christ didn't tell you this was going to be easy. He said that, you know, in this end times, you see families set against one another. And he's told him, even in his own life, he used the example that, you know, his brothers were the people who were his disciples, who were doing the work with him. And you need that level of brotherhood where it's beyond blood. And I know people say, what's beyond blood? What's beyond blood is a greater truth. Now, if you can get to that point, what can we begin doing collectively to go ahead and fight this? And what I think we have to do is continue what's happened. We are pulling out of the system. We have no other choice. Do not let finances alone dictate what you must do. Get what you need to survive, okay? Get the actual assets you need intelligently. I told you, you better be getting fuel sources that you have on hand to meet your needs for a winter that could last a while. And food, of course, food and fresh water. Don't trust water from an external supply. You need to have good purification systems. You know all this. And, of course, you know, self-defense. But what we need to do more than that is understand that these problems that happen when you have a lack of food and lack of fuel are the fuel for war. China's bond market's about to collapse, at least the real estate bond market, because Evergrande's going down on Saturday, apparently. When it does, we'll see crypto go up even more as money flees the Chinese market. And as we see China in a more desperate spot, we see the likelihood of war increase manyfold, starting with perhaps an invasion of Taiwan, or maybe a feint somewhere else, or maybe there might be a sneak attack on the United States. Who knows? If that happens, then the same government that hates you and me, that goes ahead and speaks only to the interests of a narrow group of people who are indoctrinated, as it works against the long-term interest of this people on so many levels, is going to beg us to fight for them. And the answer is we can't. We now need to begin building resilient networks of people who are in these small groups connected to larger groups through symbology and ideology that don't have an organization because they'll decapitate any leaders, that go out there and say that between us, what we're going to do is we're going to stand on these principles. And this is why I submit to you the easiest principles is it's number one, we stand for Christ. Number two, we stand against the injection. Number three is we want something better than America. America betrayed us a long time ago. And what that means, I think it's lots of different answers. I'm going to be up here in the Atlantic, and I'll tell you what I think people should do up here in the Northeast. Let's fly the Washington's Crossing flag. You've seen it. It's a pine tree on a white field that says an appeal to heaven. And if people all around the world want to do that and say, we are just going to reach to one another, let's start wearing the symbols of a people who are freed from our governments. And in every country around the world that I follow in any depth, with very, very few exceptions, especially none in the developed world, that these governments are working universally against the interest of the people, and that this third war is a war of the global elites and a transhuman agenda against the individual sovereign peoples of the world. And look, I don't begrudge any people, any ethnicity, their ability to serve, or for that matter, as much as I disagree with the belief structure, if you have a group of people who share a different faith and you want to live apart and do your thing, then that's your choice. God gives you free will to do that. That's not my issue. I don't have a beef with you other than that separation is a necessity between us because we cannot have competing truths anymore. We don't have time for that disunity and for that demonic doctrine that's been foisted upon us. And it saddens me, and I have to say this, but I've said it a million times. When you talk about this, I talk about Christians, and I don't really like to get into theology on weekday shows, but I will say this. The amount of Christian churches, the denominations that have sold out to this injection is completely terrible. The preaching that's been out there has been unbiblical. And this conflation that's happened where this idea that there are paths to salvation that don't go through Christ that are taught because there's a sort of worship of Old Testament without considering the key redemptive act of Christ is complete apostasy, and I think it's going to lead people to the pit of hell. I really do, and I'll stand against that at all times. There is no salvation without Jesus Christ, his sacrifice, and his blood is our purchase. That's the ransom which we were paid to go ahead and have a chance to, have the grace we can never earn for ourselves. So, in Us Versus Them, and I know this is a heavy show. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing it late at night or early in the morning. I'll go till about 6. It's about 15 minutes from now. Then I got to go back and keep the wife company and have our coffee time. What you aren't ready for is what it's like when everyone turns on you and everyone hates you. And people you thought you were your friends, you see an ugly side come out fast. Lack of food, lack of preparation. The Tower of Babel is going to fall of its own accord. I agree with you, Grand Flash. And the things, I know a lot of people worry about other things like politics, demography, all that. Those things will sort themselves out. I mean, urban dwellers are going to be a non-entity. People who have gone into the system in terms of injections will end up being just foils and vassals of that. They're going to be expendable, and they're going to be used in that way. And there's no way that won't happen, because what will happen is their own fears will guide them, and depending on what the system wants, maybe it'll offer them a cure of some sort to keep them going and say, here is the thing, here is the cost. And for those of us who are existing outside of it, I'm going to tell you, the systems of the enemy aren't going to help you. Cryptocurrency is not going to save you. The internet's not going to allow communications. You're going to have to go low tech unless you have something really, really, really high tech where you can go ahead and resist the NSA coming after you if you have any efficacy beyond hiding yourself in a hole in the ground for a while. And if that's what you want to do, hey, there are worse strategies out there. I don't think it's going to work in the long term, and I think the world will eventually grab you, because that scenario leads to a loss for all of us, and that's not really going to be helpful until Christ comes along, because that's how the end times battle plays out. So what am I hoping to achieve here by sharing this? Good morning, Patches. Yeah, I was up early today. I wasn't sleeping as much as I might have liked. What I would say to you is that if we can begin building a network, an international network that shares information, that identifies key nodes, the one thing about the system we fight is it depends on a lot of things going right. And perhaps there is a strategy, and we've seen this sort of with Hamilton Southwest and other places, where if key elements stand against it and don't allow the system to go forward, maybe we can make it all fall, and then in a reset we can do it again, something differently. And a reset's going to be ugly and bad enough, but it's better than having to fight a government that's actively coming against us, and the wars between governments used to justify to their people the Governments will fight wars against one another for the same reason the US and USSR fought the Cold War, because it gives them a carte blanche justification for every form of tyranny and control they want. It gives them a reason for the Green Pass. It gives them a reason for perpetual lockdowns. It gives them a reason to arrest you for looking at a sunset down in Melbourne. It gives them all these sort of ridiculous sanctions where unthinking people who have been propagandized to the point of slavish response are going to enable that. And we are seeing the push for that. We're seeing the first signs and evidence of it. We see that when these nurses who chose to value health over their job are kicked out, FEMA comes in and provides people, and the National Guard comes in and provides people, and who knows, it won't be long before the UN comes in and provides people. And what we see is a purge happening across all sectors of society that matters. It's law enforcement, it's first responders, it's medicine, it's transport, automation where it can be used, people who are subservient to the system where it can't. And all of us are leaving with these high, noble, heroic gestures. Like, I was watching all these state troopers in the state of Washington, like 100 of them laid their boots down on the state step. It's a beautiful symbolic scene for people who have no understanding and concept of nobility. What functionally it means is now we are dealing with a police state that's more advanced than the state of Washington. Or if you want, we're dealing with a medical system in my home state of Maine that's more broken. What did the Supreme Court do? It sat on their hands and went and rolled a couple more bonbons. Same thing it always does. So I'm telling you, and people say, well, we just need to talk more and protest more. No, America is a wicked, evil place. It has been for a very long time. We're Babylon. We're in love with beauty, and we think because we're good warriors, we're great people. You know, the blood of the undead is just the beginning of our sins. The pride we've had over years about how we look at ourselves is something that deserves to be removed, and the Lord's going to do it. And what's the saying you see in the Bible? Our stench has wafted up to heaven, and who knows what natural disasters may come, or unnatural disasters. Don't forget about La Palma and all these things. You know, it wouldn't take much for certain weapons to set off a sort of chain of events where the war against our people will be ultimately won. And I want to say one other thing about that. America used to be the indispensable nation because of our currency and because of our military. China can replace both if it really comes down to it at this point, and they like that global social credit score system. Or they could use Bitcoin. It doesn't really matter. But what matters is that America is no longer indispensable. And like happens to a lot of older employees after their time has come, we are going to be removed. The problem is we have a lot of people who have a good fighting ethos and abilities, and we have a lot of weapons. So what has to happen? We need to be set against one another, or we need to be set into such a scenario where we can't offer any problems. And whether it be natural disasters, a release of a stronger pandemic, or whether it could be anything. It could be a war that's put upon us. Whatever it ends up being, some combination thereof, we are going to be removed as a potential irritant through the division against us. And this has been done for a very long time. We have not been allowed to have unity, because every time someone speaks a real truth about society, whether it be about divinity, whether it be about demography, whether it be about something as simple as saying that boys have a penis, girls have a vagina, even something as simple as that gets attacked. And why? Because it's psychological warfare to remove you from truth, because people cannot build a successful society or a successful culture around lies. So every lie is permitted in America, and every truth is forbidden. And that is why you have to fight for the ultimate truth, because it's the one pathway that you can actually unite around that will get you out of this mess. And that is what we're dealing with when we deal with an us versus them scenario. Do you need to have skill sets? Sure. Do you need assets? Yes. Gear, equipment, a tactical kit, I guess that's the phrase. Yeah, all of that. Great. It's good. But more than that, you need an idea of what you're fighting for, and what you can't be fighting for is this. And I have wasted, because I supported that idiot Trump for years. We have wasted so much time trying to save this system. Don't save the system. You don't want to save the system. You have a birthright that entitles you to something better. And if you waste time in trying to save the system, all that's going to happen is you're going to have compromises that break your heart in a world that gets a little bit worse every day. Instead, imagine something good. Give your chance for something better. You're like a spouse who goes forward. We are a country, collectively. He beats me because he loves me. American citizens are a battered wife to our tyrannical government, and we can walk away. We really can. Might we get something thrown at the back of our head? Yeah. But if we stand with one another, we can resist this. And that's what I'm telling you. And look, I know a lot of people invested a lot of time and a lot of energy in these ideas. And you're like, well, back in the day, no. They were still Masons. Still that left-right thing. It was still this idea. I mean, the very first thing America said was, let's get religion out of it. It's what caused New England. That's what caused the Civil War, if you really don't know. It's that New England became secular freaks the first time around. They became transcendentalists who believed nature was all things. So we went to war with the South over a practice that would have been gone in 20 years anyway. And the bankers used it as an excuse to try to get in there. Lincoln actually resisted. It's one of the things he did that was quite good, actually. And it bought us a little more time. But they got their clutches in there. They always want war. I mean, this goes back to if you want to see the War of the Spanish Succession. And when you had, what the hell was the name of the guy? Charles Montagu comes out of nowhere to suggest building the Bank of England to fund William of Orange, a Dutchman put on the throne of England, to fight a war ongoing against France, where the most rich guy was the Mark Milley of his time, the Duke of Marlborough, who went forward with, he was a member of the Churchill family, actually. Names don't change that much if you know the history of this. And what they did was they would get into wars every year, and they would just kill different cities, and they'd impoverish both countries so that the leaders would get wealthy, the banks would own the debt, the governments would be subservient, the people would be in bondage, and the war would never end. And eventually it did, because Queen Anne got in there, and then she died, and then it went back to crap again. And all the wars followed and eventually led to the American Revolution, not because of all the crap you're told about, but because of the issuance of colonial script made it unaffordable. Ben Franklin wrote about that. But you're not allowed to know your history either. So the same thing happens over and over again. We're led into conflicts with one another over mammon, over the search of money and control over it, and over lies we're told about who is against us. Who is against us? The same people have always been against us. Governments in service to Satan because they make Faustian deals for power. And our government's done it worse than anybody. You don't think we became the hyperpower because we have a giant obelisk, Bale's dick sitting in the middle of the Washington? You don't know what that is? That's what it is. Go look at the occultism of that city. It's absolutely disgusting. And one day that may fall. And if it does, it will be a sign from the Lord that he's sick of him. People say, oh, it's terrible. How can you be against our country? I'm for God. I'm for people. That's what Christ says. 2 commandments. He said, I think Matthew 23, if I remember right. These 2 commandments. Love God with all your heart, right? And number 2 is love your neighbor like you love yourself. I love you all. I really do. And it's hard for me to love people because the people out there you can't love very easily anymore. I was reading all these horrible invectives written against us, and I'm like, I go to Dana, and I'm like, are these still people? Do we have to care about them? And I'm not sure they are anymore. And I'm not saying that because I want to hurt anyone's feelings, but I think they're on a path where that may not be the case. And if you try to save everybody, you won't save anybody. Only Christ can do that. And even then, God offered salvation. He offered himself as sacrifice to save the world. And most people said, nah, I don't want that. Give me some more stuff. Where's the cheese whiz? This is the world we live in. And it's sad and it's tragic, but I come on here because we do have each other. And thank you, Bear, by the way, for your very kind gift. I appreciate that. Let's see. When peace like a river attends my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul. Let's see. Grand Flash writes, a committed, cohesive, nationalist, blood and soil extended family will always defend a polyglot of calls of culture's regime, regardless of weaponry or a central banker's money. I think that what happens is a strong culture is what builds a thing. I mean, take Poland or Germany. These are tribal cultures too. I mean, Germany was Angles and Saxons and Jutes, and or use an example. England was the Vikings that came in, and the Norman French, and the Gaelic people who were there, and the Celts. But look, I know that you're an ethno-nationalist and you think that blood's enough. I get that, and it's not. I spent enough years digging down that hole. It just isn't. And you can see how many countries got overrun by it. But it does help. It does make things easier. I will admit it. Why won't I admit it? People generally get along easier with people who are more like themselves. And I think that it makes sense to have a certain continuity in a group of people. I think that you need people you can trust. And if people who are built like you are around, you'll probably feel safer. I don't have an issue with that. I do think that ultimately, though, the root of it has to be a commonality of belief. And I'll tell you why. What you see overwhelmingly is that history ends up being shaped by people who go out there in faith, who fight and overrun. I mean, use the jihad as a perfect example. It ran over plenty of, perfectly reasonable, homogenous cultures. The Egyptians were at that time. The Berbers were at that time. The Visigoths, you want to pick something that's this ethnic and a European flair that got run out of Spain by, a polyglot group. And you could say, well, it wasn't stable. Well, you're right, it wasn't stable, but the balance we're looking for is a balance between stability and as well as vitality. So what I would suggest, and what I believe in, look, you'll make your own bets, and that's fine. The bet you need to make is that you bet on people, because you don't have enough time to pull together other than who you could actually reach, and you want to find people who have a commonality of beliefs, and if you have other things in common, all the more for you. I'm all for that. If you have people, I mean, geography is important, right? You want people with skill sets, and if you have people, you need to know and trust one another. And yeah, people who live in a certain environment, maybe, ethnicity. Okay, if that's what your thing is, you want to go for it, it's fine. I see it, I get it, I know why it works for people. Because if I will tell you this, if you exist outside of a group and you are in an ethnic group that does not fit the majority of whoever's around you, you're going to be looked upon askance. And that's as true as a white person as the hood as it would be as a black person in the wilderness. And this is just truth. I mean, you can say, oh, it's terrible he says that's reality. People aren't going to know. It's not that you're a bad person, but you're not around there from there, and that's you better know your area, and that's why you have to be reaching out there. You need to understand who's actually around you, and this is just straight pragmatic understanding. But I wanted to talk more about, in the last couple minutes here, what I wanted to talk about is just the signs of what is coming here. And the supply chain stuff's pretty bad, but what's even worse than that is the militarization that's happening of different aspects of this. The National Guard is being called into hospitals. The National Guard is being called into ports. And keep in mind, in a lot of places, this is being done deliberately in places with left-wing governors who have been very suspect in their handling of things. Think of like Hochul in New York or Newsom in California or Inslee. And what's happening is you're seeing the key infrastructure is basically being taken off the table. I do think another interesting place I haven't mentioned, but we should keep an eye on, is Chicago. A lot of the police, and they got a pretty powerful union there, saying we're not going to go ahead and take this thing. Maybe they know some things good for them. And the governor doesn't seem too eager to send people in there for them. Chicago may very quickly become one of the first war zones. And it always is. I mean, the amount of deaths there are staggering. The city's a communist nightmare. But I do think it's worth keeping an eye on that. But it's also worth keeping an eye on it for this purpose. Chicago is the center of the rail trails, the rails network in America always has been, because it's the best inland port for both getting things out by sea, getting things in by sea, and getting them out by rail to all the different places. So anything going by rail is going to go through there. If highways begin breaking down, if airports have problems getting things in and out, look for the rails to be the next place they try to go. But that is not going to be easy, because the center of it at Chicago is going to have a lot of issues. So if you're on the coast and you're counting from things to come from the heartland, especially as these are red states and there's political conflict going forward, those goods may not move. A lot of truckers don't want to move along them. And what's happening is the government is paying people to work for them who do not have the approved status, but trying to bankrupt all other alternatives. And you're seeing this in how FEMA is being employed, how the National Guard is being employed, how we're seeing military in more places. I've been watching videos all morning. And we see this also in a long set of disconnected stories that have been going on for at least a year about farmers being paid to torch their crops, about being people who produce liquid energies like oils and whatnot being told to dump their load. We see artificially induced scarcity happening in this nation. We see it in the longshoremen who, look, if they were not offloading this because they were trying to stand against the mandate, I'd be the biggest fan. But something different is happening there, and I think that story is going to reveal itself to our tragedy. Yeah, I don't blame you. Bear says he's a truck driver, won't go to the East Coast, and I get it, man. I get it. I wouldn't want to drive into New York. I was a driver for years. I was a courier, so I kind of understand your market. I knew a lot of guys who rolled on 18 wheels. And if you're up here like us in Maine, we have to think about these things. We're at the end of the supply line, and I don't think the Canadians are going to help us. God knows they're in a worse shape than we are in so many ways. All of those sorts of problems, right? And as those things become worse, you're going to see. So let's use the example of Bear's giving us. People don't bring things there. People on the coast are going to start screaming, attack them, attack them. And so we are being forced deliberately into a sort of civil war, an us versus them scenario. And it sucks because it's not state against state. That would be better, ironically, but it's really town against town, household against household. And so you better have some friends. And what I'm saying is they will try to coalesce us into two sides. But if you've seen one of the two sides we've been coalesced to this point served our interests. One of the Democrats done good for us. One of the Republicans done good for us. The answer is neither has done good for us, and they're not going to because they don't want to. So what has to happen is we need to pull ourselves apart in all the different pieces where the good things can hold together and we can have a restart. Because the one thing I'm absolutely certain of is we need a reset and we need to have something different to fight these global systems. Now, the one criticism that will be had of that position, and it's a reasonable one, goes something like this. It's that, well, external threats will destroy us if we go ahead and do that. But the problem is, the reason we have so many external threats is because our imperial government in Washington goes ahead and messes with them all. In a lot of ways, we are stuck in that scenario no matter what. So if we begin removing ourselves from that equation, if anything, we might diffuse that. And I will tell you right now, if war comes and we're attacked by some foreign power, the best thing sane states can do is begin declaring secession, grab your friends, and get a posse together. Texas becomes its own country. If they want to fight, let D.C., New York, and Chicago fight this war. Let L.A. and San Francisco fight a war if they want to fight. We don't need to fight. And look, I have no love of China. It's terrible what they do to their people. They're a terrible country. And so are we. And so is Italy. And so is Germany. And so is France. And so is the U.K. And so is Australia. All of them are. All these governments. And none of them are democracy. Government to the highest bidder. That's all it is. For fake money. I mean, honestly, the world's like a game of Monopoly where you let the cheat play banker and you're surprised when he wins. I mean, how messed up is this? Why? Because we worship money? Because we think it's cool to have? Because we like the illusion of possession in a world of temporary existence. That's what we like. That's why we're fooled. That's why I keep telling you you need the deeper spiritual truths. Because I'll tell you what, otherwise you're just going to go to war over material status with one another. You're going to. Because everyone who assumes on these other scenarios of all these other means of organization don't think about what happens when things get bad and what really motivates people. If what motivates you is stuff and survival and nothing more, you'll end up killing the people around you because your own fears will get the best of you. You need a degree of humanism to save you from this. You need a degree of altruism. God forbid I say you need a divine spark, because it's hard enough to like people in a good time. I don't like people. It's hard for me to talk to people. I want to like people, but then I talk to them and I hate them again. And then I repent and I ask for forgiveness. But it's getting harder. That's why I try to make friends. That's why I come on here. I talk to you guys. Never has there been a more worthy group of misanthropes, although some of you are taking a little long to get it, a little slow at the end of the class, and that's fine. That's fine. Can't get everybody. But I'm getting some people and talking to more people, but I'm letting you know what's coming so that you're mentally prepared for it as much as you can be. Because at least if you have a context to understand the shock you're going to experience, I think it makes it just that little bit easier. It's never going to be easy, and it's not going to be happy, and it's not going to be simple. But at least you know what's coming, and that's what I can tell you. Food shortages, 1 to 2 months. Fuel shortages, 2 to 3 months. Potential for war, rising constantly. Purchasing value of the dollar, you have to figure in goods costing 5 to 10% more if they're available per month now. That's where we're at. And you have to figure also in shortages. If you need backup supplies, you might want to get, if there are things that are crucial to you, you might want to get an old, used, broken one for parts. A lot of people doing that, very, very smart. Communications, monitored. People going to jail for false arrest, going to increase. Infrastructure shutdowns, going to increase. Mandates going to continue. Bad laws being imposed on people and injections being put on kids going to go forward. And we do think, based on the studies that are starting to come out, that there's going to be loss in the immune system. A lot of people are going to be a lot sicker. Now, we don't have the dog with us today, so we'll see how that goes. But just me in the dark. Hopefully leading you into the light. You know, I don't know, like a bad Rembrandt painting or something. What do you think? Do I have the beard for it? Oh, yeah, Maine is the end of the line steak. Can we please not have lobster? Can we have hamburgers? It's going to be potatoes and haddock. I'm ready for it. I like my boring fish, you know, it's good for me. It's good for us, you know. And yeah, you're going to have local foods around, by the way. You should learn to love the local cuisine. Even if you hate it, I mean, you might be eating squash and thinking it's great because you know what? Hey, it's food. I hate squash. And the wife always tries to make me eat it. And she's right. She is absolutely right, and I am absolutely wrong. But I am being a brat because I know. I mean, it's funny, you know. We go through some of our preps. I love sweet, sugary liquids, and I purposely didn't get them, but God knows I crave them like crazy. That's why I've lost weight. All right, you don't need to know about me and my stupid foibles. You need to know about yourself and survival. Make sure you have a Bible on hand. Get yourself a physical copy. You'll need to be ready for that. You'll want that spiritual reality. Comms where you can get them. I think that's good. Abilities to heat, to provide power for yourself. Things that work on their own, pretty good. Get a hand. Get at least one hand. I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's not hard to have one hand. Even if you're indoors, you can figure out how to make one hand work, and they'll love you. Then you'll have at least an egg a day. It's 110 calories, if you get some layer feed. And some protein and fats, you're going to have a hard time getting any other way, one or two, People can handle 2 to 3 without too much of a problem. If you're anywhere, and I know they say, I mean, only roosters are pink. God knows those things go off at 4:30 every morning. Okay. These are the challenges in front of you. But when the external threats come, organize locally and do not accept authority that does not make sense for how you want to live. You owe no allegiance to anything other than the Lord your Savior and to your fellow man. That's biblical. And everything else is part of the strong delusion that we live in that's trapping us in a war that none of us should want, where states are being used against the people and states are being used against another to keep the people in line. We may very well be dealing with a biological attack that was launched by a hostile state that we helped fund the rise of because of international institutions that were behind all of us, the banks. You know it, I know it, and the evil occultists behind all of them. And they're just going, like I've told you many times, from having indirect control through finance and propaganda to direct control through virology and technology. This is the world we're coming into. If we lose this war, the future generations will not be born as human beings as we've known it. Keep that in mind as you go through and think about what you care about and what that requires of you to stand up and speak against it. I will tell you what I can about what I see. That's my part in this. And if things get any worse, I'll tell you right now. I'll tell you my red line, because I'll tell you when I get busy. I get busy when they start saying that, like they're saying in Lithuania today, that you can't go grocery shopping anymore, because that's when they have committed to starving the people out. That's when the gulags are already there. And the quarantine camps are already being built. We've seen them in Australia. We've seen them in Canada. I have no doubt they're going to repurpose one of the millions of prisons they have here in America. They seem to let everyone out for genuine crime. It won't take but 5 seconds. You wonder why they don't build them in the U.S. They don't need to. We already have a prison statement. Yeah, that too. A prison state. So, or they might just kill you, or let you starve, or let the mobs come after you, because the government is not going to take responsibility for things. If they did, Milley would be in jail for being a traitor. But he's not. We will be blamed as the traitors. We are the extremists. The propaganda state is against us. We who are human and wish to survive. So take down the stars and stripes and pick up your cross, brothers and sisters. That's it. And whatever banner you need to march under, just make sure you put the Lord in front of you. Heavenly Father, I just pray for each and every person here today, safety, that the safety that they find under the blood of the Lamb be the first thing in front of them, the truth in His words, and the fellowship that's promised to those who have this belief. I want to say that it is my hope and my prayer that every person who listens to this broadcast be safe, be healthy, and have the ability to provide provision, and that the Holy Spirit guide each of these families to safety and success. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. Assuming Hunter Biden, do I have broadband lined up for after you get from CMP? I don't even want to talk about CMP. Look, I don't think it's as simple if China takes Taiwan as America being kept out. Japan can't let it happen. The Philippines can't let it happen. Australia can't let it happen. If China goes to war with Taiwan, one way or another, we get dragged into it. And it has to do a lot with the submarine ports on the east coast of Taiwan. So we'll see. But America... It's not as simple as you think, too, because there are elements, from what I understand, within the American Navy who understand the import of this. Biden does not necessarily have control over all the military. This is a coup we're dealing with, remember, and we now live in a third world country where, the military might go one direction to some extent. I mean, they all serve globalists, but we've seen global elites backstab each other a lot. Don't get out of your head the idea that normalcy is going to return. It's not. The world we had is gone. Step into the new one, and let's try to make it a good one. That's all I got to say to y'all. Have a good day. God bless.